Hi, everyone, and welcome to Human Centered. I'm Nick Brunker, a Group Director of Experience Strategy at VMLY&R, your host for the show. Thanks for giving us a listen. Every January, technology enthusiasts everywhere set their sights on Las Vegas for the world-famous Consumer Electronics Show, also known as CES, where innovators from around the globe showcase the mega trends that look to paint a picture of the world to come. From flying cars to smart everything, each year, CES seemingly gets more and more incredible than the last. But as customer behavior has shifted, perhaps permanently due to the pandemic, this year's show seemed to become more decidedly focused on solving real human problems versus the sheer novelty of it. To share more with us and talk about this subject and more, I'm so excited to welcome in the Chief Strategy Officer of VMLY&R Commerce, Curt Munk. Curt, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Nick, thanks for having me. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about the world's largest collection of technology and innovation. So pleased to be here.
Going to be great. I am so excited. We met yesterday in the pre-meeting, and there's just so much to talk about. I mean, we're going to try to pack it all in 30 minutes. But before we dive into all that, give us a little bit about your background and your role at VMLY&R Commerce.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I'm a Chief Strategy Officer here at VMLY&R Commerce, so I get to work with a team of about 45 brand strategists, retail strategists, and marketing science folks on a daily basis. So it's all about helping our customers and clients do their job a little bit better when it comes to commerce and retail. So technology is becoming an increasingly important part of that, and so it seems perfect that it kind of matches my techie geek background with my current occupation. So in many cases, I'm in kind of the perfect role. So
it's one of those things that I like see myself as a mega nerd and a technology enthusiast, but I've never gone. So I'm super envious of the fact that you're able to go. Is this a relatively regular occurrence? How long have you been going to CES?
I've been going for about 10 years. I've had a number of clients in my background related to retail and commerce that have been heavily focused on technology, clients like Sony, Samsung, Comcast. So there was always kind of that marriage of what they sell as technology. But like I said, there's an awful lot of technology that becomes part of now how you sell. Mm-hmm. So there is certainly a product version as well as kind of a commerce version for being involved with technology today. And CES is increasingly becoming more of a showcase of both of those. So it's perfect. So I've been going for 10 years and I love it. And it changes almost every year, which is kind of exciting because, you know, I often tell people CES is kind of a backstage pass to what we're going to be talking about in the next year. Mm-hmm. So that's where a lot of the innovations that haven't yet been picked up by manufacturers are kind of revealed to the world for the first time. And, you know, obviously you see the new TV screens and the new cars and the new video games and all of that stuff is a big part of it. But, you know, there's an awful lot that happens in between the headlines on CES, which makes it worthwhile for people who are willing to put in the time and really kind of scope it out.
And it's not to say that over the last decade or more that CES has been nothing but pizzazz. There's definitely been functional utility-based innovation that's come out of these things. And obviously there are the wow moments where, you know, you see the 200-inch screen that's 16K or whatever. But as I mentioned, like the flying cars sort of example. But what I think is interesting is we've, you know, looked at life through the pandemic lens over the last couple of years, and not just about the pandemic, but overarchingly, you know, human behavior has shifted in such a way that they're looking for things and brands that meet them where they are and help them solve problems, whether they're big problems or small problems. What can you do as a brand to be authentic and make life easier? And I feel like, you know, having talked with you a little bit leading up to the podcast, that it feels like that's a theme that transcended really the entire week at CES. Talk about what you saw in terms of not just the technology for technology's sake, but technology for progress.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can't talk about CES 2022 without talking about, you know, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which has been COVID, right? There was an awful lot of technology that was specific around keeping people safe and, you know, returning to as much of a normal life as we possibly can. And that, of course, involves humans. It involves decision making. It involves in how they choose to spend their entertainment time and their entertainment dollar. And, you know, CES has always kind of been an over-the-top celebration of technology, and it was certainly that this year. But what we saw was a little bit more inward focus of technology solving human problems. And, as you and I talked the other day when we were getting prepared for this, there was the idea of CES was once upon a time, and the perception that, you're looking at all of these beautiful screens so that you can enjoy your entertainment better. And that's certainly a part of it. But now you see this technology being kind of hidden in the devices that are solving human problems, like allowing people to exercise better or smarter, or track their sleep, or keep a better eye on their nutrition or on their children. Those types of things that serve a real practical need where you don't have to appreciate the technology behind it, but you certainly appreciate the convenience and the options that it gives you as a human. So I find that to be particularly compelling about how technology continues to evolve, and more specifically, how we talk about it as consumers, because now it's instead of, oh my gosh, look at that, it's, I didn't realize technology could help me do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it's interesting.
I was going to say, when we think about where, we are as a society, there's nothing more in front of mind right now for folks than health. And you were saying, as you walk through, and you mentioned it earlier, med tech and the evolution of how that has helped people not only just kind of get a status check, but really kind of get a pulse of everyone else around them, not just an internal, but an external share of okay, how is the world around me feeling? And is there somebody who's next to me that's sick? Talk a little bit about what you saw in the medtech space.
Yeah, sensors are a big part of CES. That idea of the cameras can now sense your body temperature in real time, that you don't have to use a thermometer, that type of thing. And what we saw were a number of examples of TV screens that were displaying our body temperatures as we walked by. And they didn't, of course, ask us. And fortunately, all of us had relative temperatures, but that sort of technology can either be very overt, it can be appreciated and you can act upon it, but it can also be covert in decisions are being made about you, and people attending a conference, they're essentially hidden, which means it can potentially allow us to be safer, allow us to self-regulate, also allow to determine what groups you don't want to be a part of because they don't look as healthy as others might. It's one extreme example, but a relatively common one at this year's CES. Another great example of medtech is there was a device that was essentially a take-home therapy machine for repairing joint injuries.
Huh.
And, there's many of us have had joint injuries, whether they're knees or ankles or elbows or what have you, required us to go to physical therapy, where you went through a progressive of let's move the joint and now let's start to repair the joint and make it stronger. And that requires, of course, a therapist, requires scheduling, requires you leaving work. We all know what that's like. Now there is a device essentially that can fit into a suitcase that you put on a table that will take you through that exact same progression of kind of joint rehabilitation. And it will work on all the major joints, elbows, wrists, knees, ankles, all those sorts of things. And we'll get the joint moving. We'll work on flexibility and then add resistance that starts to rebuild the joint. And that can be done in the comfort of your own home or your own office. And of course, it is connected through your phone to a therapist who's able to monitor your progress, report pain if that's occurring. And, that is a perfect example of where you're kind of democratizing that level of care through a device and a connected thing that now replicates the expertise of a therapist. They're certainly still in the loop. They just don't happen to be in the room. That's pretty cool.
From a time horizon too, I mean, I'm curious to gauge like the maturity level of some of these technologies, because I think there's obviously a wide swath depending on the brand and depending on the technology, the innovation. Like, how soon do you think this type of stuff is going to become, active in our daily lives? Because I think that's the curve that we keep seeing, the hockey stick. Like, maybe even it's not even a hockey stick anymore. It's some right angle almost in terms of the technology evolution and how fast things are changing. Are you expecting and seeing that type of med technology getting implemented, in the next year, 2 years? Like, what are some of the time horizons that they were talking about for this stuff?
A lot of these things are being manufactured today, right? And they're just being revealed at CES and are being available and made to industry. It's interesting, having gone to CES for 10 years like I have, you start to see things that were introduced as an innovation that now become relatively standard. Mm-hmm. I'm to say I remember when the smartwatch was kind of pioneered at CES and the Fitbits and all of those, and what a deal that was. And in many cases, in 12 months, you started to see brand names selling them direct to consumer. In a year and a half, you started seeing them being sold at national retailers, and that happens fairly quickly. Because you can kind of sense the enthusiasm that comes not only from the attendees that are at CES, but also from the press that shows up as well. So a lot of these technologies show up relatively quickly. And I do hope that this home therapy machine can be one that's adopted very quickly. I'll give you one other example that kind of blew me away.
Sure.
There was it's a camera. It looks like a camera from the 1980s. It's about 4 by 5 inches and it's white, and it's a portable X-ray machine. Right?
No way.
Literally, it looked like a DSLR camera, and it was an X-ray machine. And you start to wonder about the technology that makes that happen, and then you start to think about the implications of that technology being applied to underserved communities or emergency medicine or first responders, where now they have the ability to look into the human body to diagnose some of those potential problems, or in the case of an X-ray machine, a breakage. Right? So this is way beyond whiz-bang technology. You start to immediately go to what is the practical application of that to people who need X-ray machines. And, I can't imagine that there would be a delay in getting that rolled out as quickly as possible, because now you empower medical professionals to make better decisions much faster, in many cases outside of a physical medical facility. That's pretty cool.
And you think about the journeys that impacts from a customer experience perspective. This is the type of stuff that I think us as strategists and designers and technologists, we crave this type of stuff. And I think it's great that we're starting to see those sorts of themes. Not that you didn't see it at certain points in time over the last decade or so, but I feel like as we've moved into the experience era much more holistically, it is really, really cool to see the technology serving the human need and going for progress more than just the wow factor, which I think is still, it's got the coolness factor in its own right, but it actually serves the purpose. Mobility is another category that I think has always been front of face, whether it's flying cars or drones or whatever. Mobility as a space doesn't necessarily have to do with cars. And speaking of a wide impact, mobility has a really, really broad impact. It's not just about driving yourself or even having the car drive you from A to B. It goes beyond that. Talk about what you saw in mobility.
Yeah, I think there are two components to mobility. First is the vehicle itself, and I won't call it a car, I'll call it a vehicle, because you're very rightly assessing the world in that, there will be advances in EV cars, which we saw a lot of. There will be advances in autonomous vehicles, which we saw quite a bit of. So the focus is on making that experience and increasingly the recharging experience of those EVs easier. That's going to be something that'll be part of all of our homes moving forward. But the really interesting bits are looking at the new forms of personal transport, whether that's an enclosed person pod that you can move around either a factory or a small city that is completely autonomous, very little carbon footprint. Those sorts of things are happening. A lot of electric bikes, a lot of electric scooters. I imagine within a year or so, Nick, we're going to see an autonomous scooter, right, that you essentially straddle and then it takes you on a journey without you having to direct it or navigate it or do any of those sorts of things. So there's a lot of innovation. It typically follows smaller devices, more personal one-on-one transport instead of the standard sedan and coupes that we talk about in terms of taking a family of 4 somewhere. That seems to be going away. It's more of moving one individual. So that's at one extreme. Another extreme is, John Deere had their autonomous tractor at CES. So when you get done looking at all of the 8K displays and VR goggles, you wander across the parking lot and there's this $300,000 giant green monster that can do what it does without human intervention for 8 hours at a time. That is remarkable as well. So it's less about the whiz bang kind of comforts of transportation and more about the practical application of moving people safely, quickly, without a whole lot of interaction from an operator or a director. And that's kind of cool.
But what I think is interesting to push on the John Deere example or any of the like technologies, it is using tech in a really intelligent way, pardon the pun, to remove the need for some of those, and I'm not going to call it a mundane activity by any means, but activities that a human might not be best served doing at a moment in time. Because now, think of a farmer as an example. I think we were talking about this in the pre-show yesterday. It frees them up to be doing more effective things with their time, where the technology can kind of take care of those other things. I mean, is that a trend from a mobility perspective you're seeing across the board as well?
Without a doubt. And, the farming is an extreme example, because now the farmer can do the things that the farmer needs to do to raise an efficient, safe farm and allow some of the manual work that, once upon a time was done by horses and then was done under our direction and tractors. Now that is being done by an entirely different entity, so that you can be thinking about crop rotations and environmental science and weather conditions and things like that as a farmer. But there are also the things that you're doing while transportation that is happening that I think is interesting from kind of a CX and UX standpoint, because you can imagine a future not too far in the future where we will be doing more productive activities while we're commuting. And the promise of autonomous vehicles is, in the case of those of us that work in the agency business, is we would be communicating with clients or writing presentations or doing the types of creative and strategic work that we do while we're commuting, in many cases in our own vehicle. And I think that's interesting. And from my perspective as kind of a commerce geek, I think about the potential for people to be doing the shopping and ordering and buying that they need to be able to do far more productive activities, so that way when they get home they can spend time with their families and those sorts of things. So I think there will be a revolution in the environment of transportation and how we choose to spend that time, whether it's for rest and relaxation or entertainment or productive pursuits as well. So it will free up millions of hours of commuting time, which I think we all desperately need.
There's another topic I want to get to before we run out of time, and that has to do with sustainability. We had a great conversation on a previous human-centered podcast. I think it was episode 6. If you want to go back and look, for those listeners who are following along, just go back into the show episode archives and then listen to Jen Bonham talk about sustainable design. And we talked about kind of the triad of feasibility, desirability, and viability, but she introduced in that podcast an idea of sustainability as a factor in which we design against. Is it good for the world? And it's a great podcast, totally worth going back and listening if you haven't heard it or just want to listen to it again. But when I was thinking about this yesterday, again, prepping for the show, you were talking about how sustainability has taken kind of a front and center look, and how technology is evolving in that space as well. And we know, as we've talked many times on the show, not just on that other previous episode, that customers quite literally are putting their dollars towards brands and initiatives that are sustainable in nature. They literally monetize brands that care about the environment. And it seems like, from what you were telling me, and you can tell the audience now, sustainability technology is also front and center this year. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, the previous podcast was all about the choices that we make and kind of our preferences. And many of us are trying to buy in a more responsible way, whether it's the brand of the company or kind of the intrinsics of the product that we're buying, either being reusable or recyclable or what have you, somehow kind of walking lighter on the planet. What we're seeing this year is a little bit of a revolution in that now we're expecting technology to solve some of those sustainable issues. I'll give you a couple of great examples. There's this really kind of a strange looking device called the Waste Shark that showed up from a group from the Netherlands. And it's about the size of maybe a recliner, and it charges through solar. And what it does is essentially it's a Roomba for waterways and estuaries. And this thing charges up, it goes around and scoops up plastic waste or anything else that's kind of floating on the surface of the water. It bales it, drops it off on the shore, and then goes out and kind of refills itself, right? So, there's obviously the behavior of don't throw your plastic in the water, which hopefully many of us are doing, but now there is a technology solution that's largely autonomous that will be solving for those who don't follow that advice, which is kind of interesting. So there is kind of an end-to-end solve through technology for something that we've been talking about for 20 years, those of us that have been paying attention to it. That's one example. Another great example is essentially artificial shade trees. As many of us know, it takes a while to grow a tree, but now we have technology and materials that allow us to essentially replicate the shade and the cooling patterns of natural trees by using artificial and recycled materials. So it allows us to kind of create that canopy, create that shade,
Wow.
kind of facilitate trees in public spaces. And, those things can be erected in an hour in a situation where it would take 25 years to get a shade tree to the same level of kind of performance around an environmental condition. So that's kind of cool. It's a simple example of a computer saying you need shade here because people will come if it were more comfortable, and then it kind of creates itself. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you think about the energy impact that it could be if you're in an area where maybe there is some vegetation management issues where you're getting too much sun or what have you. You obviously can't remediate that problem very quickly without something like that to come into play. So very, very interesting opportunities there in that space, and I think exciting to consider how that could actually become a way for brands to have an impact, perhaps even more so than world governments. I know that sometimes you come back to the idea that it just takes time. I mean, not to go down too much of a political path, but I think generally speaking, you look at governments across the world, it just takes time and resources and effort to get things done and accomplished, where in this case, it seems like the free market might be able to solve some otherwise really, really, wicked challenges.
There's no doubt about that, right? We had a lot of conversations at CES about, there are the charging of electrical vehicles, EVs, but there's also the ability for the EV to serve as a battery for your home, right? So we start to think about electrical current kind of flowing both ways, not only recharging our EVs, but also giving us perhaps maybe a little bit less taxing footprint on the electrical ecosystem and grid. And to that point, we are seeing kind of a shrinking of appliances, not because more and more of us are living in cities, but in many cases, when you need to do a load of laundry, you need to use your entire washer and dryer's energy consumption for a few articles of clothing. So, we saw a washer and dryer called Bob. That was about the size of, an old television set, and it allowed you to wash and dry 2 or 3 articles of clothing using standard household current and essentially just a little bit of tap water that you add yourself. And, the electrical consumption of that is much, much smaller than you would expect from traditional appliances. We're also seeing kind of in-kitchen composting, a device that's smaller essentially than a trash can that you would put your food waste into. It promises no smell, no mess, anything like that, but now kind of reduces the physical output of waste products that your house is producing as well. And it's kind of designed for apartment dwellers in that it produces potting soil and things like that essentially as the output. So brilliant. Yeah, it's to your point, we don't see a lot of national governments showing up to CES saying, hey, we've solved But we are seeing hundreds of innovators and companies coming and saying, "Hey, we think we can help. We have an idea," and it's exciting to see what they come up with, because every year we're a little surprised.
And again, it comes back to what Jen Bonham was talking about in that previous episode. It's sustainability as a factor in design, which ultimately, hopefully, leads to consumer benefit and business benefit. And it's obviously, as we've seen, feasible. It can be done. So that's right. Really cool. A couple of other quick things before we run out of time. I know you mentioned screens earlier, but I can't escape a CES conversation without getting into the whole metaverse and immersive experiences. I know you saw a couple of things, and you can hit them quickly on the evolution of screens and how that's changing. And then really, if you could, just give us a brief takeaway on where are we with the metaverse as it relates to CES and the path forward there?
Yeah. Two big questions. Just when you think you've seen everything that can be done on a screen in terms of getting bolder, brighter, bigger, and more detailed, Samsung and LG and Sony surprise you. What I can say is we're seeing evolution in kind of the physical design of screens. One in particular stood out. Samsung has a new device called the Arc, which is essentially it's beyond a curved screen. It's almost 130 degrees, where you feel like you're not really looking at it as much as you step into it, which is kind of remarkable because that one screen now is providing your entire field of view. It's certainly designed to be a monitor, but it can be just as entertaining for other types of content. The other thing that was a little bit surprising was the idea of monitors moving from the horizontal or portrait orientation to a vertical orientation based on what you're doing at the time. So if you're watching a movie, it would be the traditional horizontal format, and then the screen itself would physically rotate on the wall once you turn it into a workplace setting where you and I would be chatting on a Teams call like we are now at the top half, and I would, of course, be engaged in all of the social media and communications that I need. Love that. And the screens now are smart enough to sense he doesn't need a portrait orientation. He needs vertical, which I think is kind of cool. There were also a good number of kind of portable battery powered projectors that tended to show up at CES this year. And these are way beyond the business projectors that we're used to seeing on conference tables all over the United States. It's a little device that looks a little bit like a quart-sized paint can that has a battery in it that connects wirelessly, of course, to your phone, where you now have the ability to watch content or project content on any surface that can't move away from you any time of day. So the ability of you can create a window in a windowless office, you can create content for your children on top of a tabletop during dinner time, where they're really kind of taking the physical constraints of where screens typically had to be, like on a table or on a wall, and now makes virtually anything the potential to be a screen and allow content to be projected on. It seems like a simple idea, but when you see it in practice, you start to think about how far this can go. So, because once you take away the physical requirements of mounting a screen, then it gets really interesting. So,
especially when the quality's there. That's the other thing. Sorry to interrupt, but the thought of it's about quality too. That was always the point of diminishing returns with projectors, or doing what you suggested on the wall or on the table, is you're only going to get so much quality out of it. And it sounds like that's changing.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's related to your second question, which is a bigger question of kind of where are we with the metaverse? You couldn't walk 6 feet in Las Vegas this last month without seeing metaverse referenced in some ways. Mm-hmm. There are a lot, because at CES, there was a lot of technology that's going to be creating the metaverse, right? It's that idea of those experiences that take us out of the physical and kind of environmental limitations that we're in and enable us to interact in new and very special ways. We're seeing that, of course, in gaming, in terms of increased kind of physical activity, the haptics of an experience upon us, whether it's vests or gloves that get hot, that get cold, that can stimulate vibration or pressure. It's that idea of bringing physicality to it. But what I can say is CES did not solve what the metaverse is going to be, but what they did give us some of the ingredients that we're going to need to create it. One example that came out of China in particular, again, knowing I'm a commerce geek, was actually the ability for us or a user of this service to shop and buy in the environment of your choosing. So in my case, it would be an outdoor store or something like that where I feel most comfortable, regardless of the thing you're shopping for. That would be physical environment that you were put in. Another option would be a very high-end mall like you would see in Dubai, where everything is white and perfect and polished and clean. And then you have the choice of doing the browsing and the shopping that you would normally do in kind of a digital environment. That happens in front of you in that environment, and then you can toggle off on and off whether or not you would like to have an assistant kind of walk you through your options and help you make choices and find the products you need. And what's interesting is you're now not going into their portal as a retailer or as a brand. They are stepping into the portal where you feel most comfortable in terms of the environment, the level of care and kind of advice that you need in navigating those choices. And you have the ability to slide those up and down based on what you're shopping for. Household products, I don't need a lot of support and advice. I just need to know what's available and what can get to my house in an hour. It solves for that. Shopping for a new automobile or personal transportation device, I'm probably going to need some help. That's where the bot would come in and help you with some of that selection. And that's great because there's no pressure. It happens at your speed. It allows you to go as deep into that experience in terms of seeing, hearing, and reading as you would like to go. And I think that's interesting. Of course, there's a lot of computational power at the back end of that.
Sure.
But what it promises is a far more bespoke experience that is paced the way you need to go through that experience and not the way someone had designed it for you. And I think that's interesting. It takes you back to that human-centered thing that we started this conversation with.
That's it. I was just going to say, to kind of put a bookend on it, it really is about understanding where brands and technology can help improve and allow the customer to kind of be in control, which, not to say that it always has to be, a one-way street. The customer has to run everything, but inevitably there's a dialogue that happens, and how technology can help assist and enable that dialogue in a meaningful way on behalf of the customer, of course. I just think it's fascinating. If you bake it all up and say implications for CX practitioners, pros, experienced designers, people who are in the space that are just geeks like us, what are maybe a handful of implications to consider if you look back on your week there and could boil it down to a handful?
I think the technology is getting more sophisticated, but it's becoming more invisible as part of those experiences, because it produces a result that is more friendly for us, but it doesn't require you to understand the technology. The learning curves, I think, are going to be much shorter, right, and much less steep than they have been in technology in the past. I do think the idea of technology solving real problems, whether they're human problems or potentially even social or political problems or environmental problems, there in many cases can and should be a technology-based solution for that. So I think we should be open to thinking a little bit broader about what technology can do for us, because there's no doubt that it has broken out of the entertainment and gaming and drone box and is starting to become far more practical. I did see a piece of technology that was a drone that actually flies over areas that have had forest fires, and it plants tree seeds at kind of these, predetermined coordinates that are best for what that pine forest should be in 10 years. And I that's another example of, drone technology has been a plaything or a movie thing, but now it is essentially rebuilding forests and doing so relatively autonomously. So there's almost no limit to where we can go with this. So I think the potential is high. I think the positivity of how technology can affect our lives is way beyond what it's been before. And it's really starting to kind of come out of its shell. And maybe it took COVID to do that. I don't know. But what it did do was allow a lot of innovators with really, really good ideas to essentially not be hidden by the LGs and the Samsungs of the world. And CES got a little better view of that this year.
Well, what's exciting about it, to put a bow on this part, which is tech is going to become, synonymous with customer experiences. It already is in a sense, but the more and more quickly we transition to a world where some of the things you talked about are commonplace. Just like we talk about, your expectation of a brand is only as good as the things that you have experienced from some other brand. So the bar continues to go up, which is good. Rising tides lift all boats, so to speak. But it is really interesting to consider at the rate of change we are seeing things evolve in technology. The baseline expectation is really, really going to be a moving target almost every year. It's almost like between CESs every year, there's going to be a new high that you're going to have to hit, or a new benchmark you're going to have to hit just to stay in the game. And that's got to be the fun part.
Yeah, it is. It is. The old expression was, oh my gosh, there's an app for that. I mean, I think we have moved beyond that and starting to think, well, there is a technology for reducing plastic in the oceans, right? There is a technology for providing shade and protection from the sun for people. Those things exist or should exist. And I would guess if you've had the thought, someone's probably working on it, and we'll show it next year. So cool.
We'll have to do this again next year after you go, and we'll see how we compare this podcast to the one that we record a year from now. But before we lose you, timing wise, I'd love to check in with you on a bit about Curt, off the clock. So I know, you and I are kindred spirits in the sense we're both nerds. We love, technology, obviously love customer experience and commerce. But what, for those who may not have had a chance to meet you or get to know you a little bit, would you consider a fun fact about Curt Munk?
Well, the easy one to pull out is I've been in 2 movies.
What?
One is yeah, I know, it's true. It wasn't by design. I didn't really want to do that. I was a corpse in a movie called The Day After, which of course was about nuclear Armageddon in the 80s. A small corpse, but I was a corpse. And then I was in the movie My Best Friend's Wedding.
No way.
I was in that famous scene at O'Hare where Julia and I'm forgetting the other name of the stars were coming together, and I happened to be going through O'Hare, and they kind of grabbed me and they said, "We need you to stand here for 3 minutes." And then suddenly Julia Roberts was in front of me and they were filming. And so I was in the airport for about 30 minutes, 20 of which were in that scene, and then I got on a plane and went home. But
so hold on a second. How
totally random.
How did that though? So it sounds like that one was random, but how? I mean, I can understand the random chance of being in the airport, you get snagged, but you've been in 2. How the hell did the other one come to pass?
The producers of this movie were filming something in my area of the world, and they essentially went to a grade school and said, "Hey, we're filming a movie and we need a bunch of kids."
Oh.
And so they sent a note home with our parents, and my parents signed it. And then I showed up on set, and they basically said, "Lie here and don't move for 45 minutes." So that's what I did. I was overqualified to be a corpse in Hollywood, apparently.
Well, congratulations on that. I mean, do you already have, at least for the one with Julia Roberts, do you have the minutes and seconds of the frame that you're in, like plastered on your wall, so you can use that as your claim to fame?
I don't, Nick, but based on your comment, I'm going to have to go find that. So
you must text us, and we will find a way to share that in the show notes, so you can see Curt Munk on the silver screen, or maybe on one of those like 600-inch 16K TV screens that LG or Sony are working on.
I don't think that would be anyone's attention or good for anyone. So, but I'll be sure to find that for you, Nick.
Curt, it was so much fun talking about CES. We could do this for another hour if we had time, but sadly we do not. So thank you again for carving out 30 minutes. Seriously, it really means a lot. You spent time with us, and I know I personally really have a passion for this topic, so I think others will as well. Thanks again for the time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Nick.
And thanks to you all for listening to Human Centered as well. To learn more about our CX practice and our approach to the work, check us out online at VMLY&R.com/CX. We'd also love to hear your feedback on the show. Give us a rating and offer up your thoughts wherever you listen to your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon, and more. Have a topic idea or just want to drop us a line? You can connect with me on Twitter at Nick Brunker, or just shoot us an email. The address is humancentered@VMLY&R.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.